Good morning and welcome back to Planet Althistory. Today we are going to discuss what if the Vandals survived. The Vandals were a Germanic tribe that originated from today's Poland, and they have come a long way. They are associated with different cultures, especially during the Iron Age. But as we all know, the migration period happened and we saw a lot of movements all over the old world. The Vandals expanded into Dacia, then they received the permission from Constantine the Great to settle in Pannonia. The Goths came and they pushed them away, so did the Huns, and as a result the Vandals went further west, deep into the Roman territory beyond the Rhine River. There were countless fights between the Vandals, the Visigoths, Suebi, and the Romans of course, and the Vandals didn't freely migrate to northern Africa, but they were continuously pushed by several coalitions and they managed to secure a spot in what is known as Tunisia, or used to be known as the Provincia de Africa. The Vandals consolidated their power, and although vandalism is associated with the Vandals didn't destroy everything. Recent archaeological evidence shows us that some buildings they were renovated, the street pattern remained the same, and also some other things they were actually constructed. They were even recognized up until 455 by Western Rome as independent kingdom rather than federacy, which is a very unique occurrence. Of course, what happened then was the sack of Rome, and that's why the Vandals are the namesake of the word vandalism. After the sack of Rome, the Vandals actually continued to do some good stuff, where they supported the schools, learning, and during that period of time, many writers and scientists, they came from that part of the Mediterranean. Let's also not forget that 80,000 Vandals went all the way from Europe to northern Africa. And now, if we compare this number, it may seem very small, but if we compare that number in that time, how the world population was back then, well, we have to consider the world population was much smaller. And as a result, 80,000 people, they could make a difference in the genetic composition and the language of a certain region. The Vandal kingdom continued to exist for some time, and they did fairly well. They conquered Sardinia, Sicily, and the Balearic Islands. The Vandal kingdom was ruled for a very long time by Gaiseric, who died when he was 88 years old, a remarkable age for the late antiquity. His successor, Huneric, lost a lot of lands to the Berbers, and he also persecuted the Manichaeans as well as non-Arian Christians. Stability wasn't there, and later on Guntamund too was not a good ruler and had a lot of problems to deal with. The Berber pressure was too strong, and there was no unity in the kingdom. After losing lands to the Ostrogoths and facing many more rebellions, the Byzantines, they could easily reconquer northern Africa by 534. All of the kingdom was gone, and the Vandals, they were either sent to the Persian border or they entered the private service of Belisarius. But what if all of that changed? What if the Vandal kingdom survived? Let's say that Gaiseric, instead of persecuting Trinitarian Christians, he may not only tolerate them, but at the time of his death, he may even convert. Why? Let's just imagine that he would understand that at this point Arianism would still be in the minority and that his kingdom, in order to survive after his death, would need a better fundament. Of course, some nobles, they will rise up, and at the same time it could also be a bit problematic, and also the successor would need to crush those rebellions. However, if we have a clear successor in that moment after the death, these rebellions, they could easily be crushed. The successor would then have some peace within the Vandal kingdom, and the Vandals, they could also conclude a treaty with the Romans, ending piracy and focusing on the Berbers. That would be the best way for them to survive. Now, the Berbers will not just go away or be beaten easily. However, the Vandals will be able to have more manpower to their disposition, and with trade growing, it would also give them more money, and thus they would have enough money to pay a good amount of money to the soldiers, or they could even pay off the Berbers. In that case, it would also make sense for them to do so. Not everything would work well, but the Vandals would, unlike in OTL, not just send their whole army away to crush revolts, be it in Sicily or Sardinia. That was actually the main downfall for them, and that's why they got easily conquered by Byzantium. The army would be in northern Africa, and while Belisarius is a good and strong general, the Vandal kingdom has now a better position where they could compete against the Byzantines and fight them in a defensive war. The Vandals could still lose some battles, yes, but the war would be extended and Italy would later on become a priority for Justinian. White peace could be made, or maybe some small amounts of money would be given to the Byzantines, and it's possible that Justinian the Great could even convince later on the Vandals to participate in the war against the Ostrogoths. Why would he do that? The Byzantines, they actually conquered Italy, yes, but they were also in not such a good spot to do so. And thus, if they could get some allies helping them, it would be, of course, a big advantage for them. The Byzantines, in such a scenario, they would still burn a lot of their resources and manpower and also money from their treasury, while the Vandals too would have a lot to digest, but even they could expand and take parts of mainland Italy. Perhaps southern Italy would become part of a new, bigger Vandalic kingdom. The conquests, they would be minimal, and the Vandals would still focus more on northern Africa. Speaking of which, Iberia may actually in this timeline see an invasion of the Vandals instead of Justinian the Great. Why is that? The Visigothic kingdom, they always had a few civil wars here and there. There were many different factions competing against each other. And due to the fact that the Vandals and the official leaders of the Visigothic kingdom had an alliance, the Vandals would then come and expand a bit in Iberia. Probably they would agree to help putting someone in charge in there. Maybe the Visigothic kingdom could end up becoming some satellite kingdom, but at some point, the Vandals, they would become more ambitious and they would then start to take parts of Iberia. Byzantium would have a few more resources left in this ATL, but not by such a huge margin. And when the Islamic invasions happened, the Byzantines would still lose a huge portion of their lands, but the conquest would go a little bit slower. And they could perhaps even stall the Arabs for a few more years. At the end, the Byzantines, they would still lose Egypt, Libya, and so on, and the Vandals would then step up and expand a bit as well. But they too would face some Arab invasions. However, in this timeline, the Vandals would maybe end up not losing. Not only were they now adapted due to the constant fights against the Berbers, but the Vandal kingdom would religiously also be more united. And there would also not be this point where some minorities would welcome the Arabic invasion. It is said that very often in parts like Egypt or Syria, a lot of the minorities, they welcomed the new Arabic rulers. Whereas in such a timeline where the Vandal kingdom survives and also converts, this would not happen. Thus the religious minorities, they would not run to the Arabs for support because the minorities, they would be very small, and also the majority, well, they would actually support the same religion or confession that the state has in that time. This also means that the Muslims will never be able to invade Iberia, and once more the Vandals, they could be called by a contender of the Visigothic throne to help him. Iberia would at some point just completely fall to the Vandals, and they could consolidate their border around the Pyrenees against the Franks, who in this timeline would be fairly weak due to the many butterflies involving their leaders. The Vandals would experience a huge pressure, especially from the Arabs, for many years, but still also from the Berbers. The revolts from the Berbers would be smaller, as the Vandals were more successful in crushing them, integrating or even assimilating them, and the Arab pressure could stop during the time of the first fitna. The Arabs would after that not really be able to conquer more of northern Africa, and they would put their focus somewhere else. Morocco, Algeria and Tunisia would still be very much part of the Mediterranean, while Egypt, Libya would now go a different way and be part of a different cultural environment. The Vandals may stay an ally to the Byzantines, and due to the butterflies in Europe, much of Europe would be unrecognizable. Various Frankish kingdoms would exist but never really expand beyond the Pyrenees. They would compete against each other. Italy would still be under Byzantine control, and even the church could be different, because there would never be a separation between Catholicism and Orthodoxy. Yes, we could still see some separations happening, but they would be very minimal. England, for instance, would also stay very Germanic, because there would never be a Norman invasion. But Central Europe and Eastern Europe, they could follow more or less the same route, and even Northern Europe too could follow more or less the same route. It's unclear whether the English would fall to the Scandinavians or if England would just stay independent, but even so, no matter if the Scandinavians come or if the English they stay Germanic, they would still stay very Germanic, because the Scandinavians are Germanic people after all. The Vandals would actually hold important scientific and educational power and become the second strongest power in the Mediterranean, if we don't count the Caliphate. Much of Europe would be split, and the Vandals would, together with the Byzantines, have an alliance to combat the Arabs. At some point, the Vandals may expand their trade network in the Sahara and even gain the knowledge of islands such as Madeira, the Canaries, and later perhaps Cape Verde, or even the Azores. At this point, it's very difficult to predict whether the Byzantines would still continue to survive or not, but let's just assume they still fall or that they lose Constantinople. Then in that case, it would be the Vandals who would sail around Africa and even perhaps discover the Americas. They would at the end become more similar to Carthage than Rome, a Germanic Latin Carthage in a way. The Vandal kingdom would have a stronger Germanic presence as well, due to the fact that these 80,000 Vandal soldiers, they would not just be taken away by the Byzantines, and as a result, North Africa would be more Germanic Latin and Christian as well. The people, they would probably still speak something more similar to the Latin language, but there would be many words that come from Punic as well as from the Germanic Vandal language. Constant fights against the Muslim world, they would erupt, and occasional periods of peace, they would help the Vandals with their discoveries. Would the Vandal kingdom become a world power at the end, with colonies all over the Americas and a trade network coming from India, China, all the way to Europe? Or would the Vandals actually fall miserably, just like the Byzantines? And that's where we leave it for now.
That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed my video. Be sure to like and subscribe, leave a comment, support me also on Patreon, and join my forum, forum.planetalthistory.ga. Until next time on Planet Alt History.